I'm Bethany, I'm 29, and everyone thinks I'm the villain in this story, but they have no idea what I actually went through. You want to know what really happened the day my husband missed our daughter's birth? Fine. But don't expect me to apologize for being human when everyone else failed me. When Ian and I got married 2 years ago, I thought I understood what military life would be like. The moving around, the deployments, all of it. What I didn't understand was how completely alone I'd feel. Like, really alone. Everyone talks about military wives being these super strong, independent women, but honestly, sometimes I just wanted my husband home to help me decide what to make for dinner. Getting pregnant 6 months after our wedding should have been this amazing thing. Ian was excited at first, came to that initial appointment where they confirmed everything was real. We were both grinning when we heard the heartbeat. But then 6 weeks later, deployment orders came through. 6 months overseas. Just like that, I was handling my entire first pregnancy alone. I'm not gonna lie, I was bitter. All these other wives had their husbands around for the cute bump photos and feeling the baby kick, and I'm sitting in base housing eating cereal for dinner again, watching Netflix alone every night. Ian would call when he could, but it wasn't the same as having someone actually there. That's when I decided to use a midwife instead of the regular base doctors. I wanted something more personal, since I was doing this whole thing solo anyway. Ian was fine with whatever I wanted. Typical him, always agreeable about pregnancy stuff, since he felt guilty about being gone. Helena was in her 50s, super experienced, had all these credentials from other military wives. During those months when Ian was deployed, she became this constant in my life. Every appointment, every worry, every random pregnancy question. Helena was there. Here's where it gets complicated. Helena started making these little comments about military husbands. Nothing huge at first, just things like you're handling this so well on your own, or it must be hard not having support. Which wasn't wrong, it was hard. As my pregnancy went on and I got more emotional, these conversations with Helena became more frequent. She'd ask about my support system, about how I felt about Ian missing all these milestones. And honestly, I was feeling pretty sorry for myself. Here I was growing a human being, dealing with morning sickness and back pain, while my husband was off playing soldier. I started venting to Helena more than I should have, telling her how frustrated I was, how Ian didn't really understand what I was going through. How I worried he'd come back, expecting everything to be normal when I'd been basically a single mom. Helena was such a good listener, always validating my feelings, always agreeing that yes, this was really hard. But Helena wasn't just some neutral healthcare provider. She had her own agenda. She started asking pointed questions about Ian, about our relationship, about whether he was controlling or if I felt safe expressing my needs, which felt invasive, but I was so starved for adult conversation that I kept talking. I told her about how Ian could be intense sometimes, how he had this military mindset about everything being organized and planned, how he'd get frustrated when I'd change my mind about things or get emotional. Normal relationship stuff, right? But Helena would nod with this concerned look and make these little sounds like she was hearing something troubling. Helena was planting seeds, making me question things about my marriage I'd never really thought about. She'd ask things like, "Does he listen when you express concerns?" And when I'd answer honestly, because Ian could be stubborn and did have strong opinions, she'd get this look. The worst part is, I started looking forward to these appointments more than I should have. Helena made me feel heard in a way Ian couldn't from thousands of miles away. She made me feel like my feelings mattered, like I wasn't just being dramatic. By my third trimester, our conversations had gotten intense. Helena would ask about specific incidents, times when Ian had raised his voice, times when he'd made decisions without consulting me, and I gave her material because Ian wasn't perfect. He could be controlling. He did have a temper sometimes. But here's what I didn't tell Helena. I gave as good as I got. When Ian was controlling, I'd be passive-aggressive right back. When he'd make plans without me, I'd change them just to spite him. We weren't some perfect couple, but we weren't abusive either. We were just two stubborn people figuring out marriage. Helena didn't want to hear about my part, though. She was focused on building this narrative about Ian being this absent, controlling military husband. And honestly, some days that's exactly how I felt. So I let her build that narrative. I fed into it, because it felt good to be the victim for once. The closer I got to my due date, the more Helena would bring up safety planning and support systems and making sure I felt empowered during labor. She kept talking about how important it was, that no one could override my decisions or make me feel unsafe. The way she said it made it clear she was talking about Ian. When Ian finally came home a week before my due date, I was ready to have him back, but also weirdly resentful. He'd missed everything and came home expecting to just slide back into husband mode. That rubbed me wrong. Helena met Ian at our final appointment, and I could tell immediately she didn't like him. She was cold, professional, asking pointed questions about his expectations for the birth. Ian was confused by her attitude. He was just trying to be supportive now that he was finally home. That appointment was awkward. Helena kept directing questions to me, even when Ian tried to participate. She'd ask things like, "Are you comfortable with your husband being present?" in this tone that suggested maybe I shouldn't be. After that appointment, Helena called me privately. She said she was concerned about the dynamic she'd observed between Ian and me. She said Ian seemed demanding and controlling and wanted to make sure I knew I had options. That if I ever felt unsafe during labor, I could ask for him to be removed. I should have shut that down. I should have told Helena that Ian was my husband, and of course I wanted him there. But I didn't. Because part of me was still angry about those 6 months alone. Part of me wanted Ian to understand how hard this had been. Part of me wanted him to prove he deserved to be there. The morning I went into labor was chaos. I woke up around 5 with contractions way more intense than expected. Ian was immediately in military mode, timing contractions, grabbing bags, calling everyone. His take-charge attitude was exactly what I needed, even though I'd been annoyed with him for being controlling about everything else. We got to the hospital, and everything was moving fast. My mother-in-law was driving up from an hour away. My mom was catching a flight. Helena showed up a few hours later, and I felt the tension change immediately. She was professional with hospital staff, but cold toward Ian. Helena started making these little comments. When Ian would help me through contractions, she'd say things like, "Let's focus on what makes you comfortable," while looking at me. When he'd ask questions about my progress, she'd redirect and say, "This is about what the mother needs." It was subtle, but definitely happening. I was in so much pain and focused on labor that I wasn't processing how weird the dynamic was. I just knew Helena was there advocating for me, and Ian was being his usual intense self. As things progressed and I got closer to being fully dilated, Ian went downstairs to pay for my mom's cab. While he was gone, Helena asked me point blank if I was feeling pressured by Ian's presence. She said she'd noticed concerning dynamics and wanted to make sure I felt empowered to make decisions about who I wanted in the room. I was literally in transition, having the most intense contractions of my life, and she's asking about relationship dynamics. I wasn't thinking clearly. When she asked if Ian was making me feel supported or stressed, I said something like, "I don't know, he's just a lot sometimes," because that's how I felt in that moment. Helena nodded like I'd confirmed her worst suspicions. She said she wanted to make sure I felt completely safe, and if anyone was adding stress, she could handle it. I thought she was just being supportive. I had no idea what she was planning. When Ian came back with my mom, Helena was waiting in the hallway. I couldn't hear what they were talking about, but I could see Ian getting agitated. After a few minutes, they both disappeared and Helena came back looking serious. She told me she'd had to make a difficult decision for my safety and the baby's safety. She said she'd observed red flags in Ian's behavior and instructed hospital staff to restrict access to my room. She said Ian had been aggressive and demanding, and she felt it was best to limit his involvement. I was so out of it from pain and exhaustion that I didn't process what she was saying. I just nodded and focused on pushing when she told me to. It wasn't until after our daughter was born, after I'd been through the whole experience without Ian there, that I realized what had happened. Helena had told the hospital staff that Ian was abusive. She'd said I'd reported feeling unsafe with him there, and as my healthcare provider, she was recommending he be kept away for everyone's safety. The hospital took her recommendation seriously because she was a licensed midwife with years of experience. When it was over and I called Ian to ask where he'd been, the pain in his voice was devastating. He'd been sitting in the waiting room for hours, trying to get answers, being told by security he wasn't allowed back in. He'd missed everything: the birth, those first moments, being able to support me. I started to realize this was partially my fault. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I'd fed Helena's narrative about Ian instead of defending him when she started planting seeds about him being dangerous. But Helena robbed me too. She took away my right to have my husband there during one of the most important moments of our lives. She made a unilateral decision about my marriage based on her own biases. She played God with our lives because she thought she knew better. After we got home, Ian was different. Not angry, but hurt in a way I'd never seen. He kept asking what I'd said to Helena, how she could have gotten such a wrong impression. That's when I had to face what I'd done. Instead of admitting I'd complained about Ian, I got defensive. I told him Helena was being overly cautious, that she'd misunderstood the situation. I made it sound like some crazy misunderstanding instead of taking responsibility. Ian didn't buy it. He knew there had to be more. He kept pushing for details about my conversations with Helena. The more he pushed, the more defensive I got. Because admitting the truth would mean admitting I'd betrayed him while he was deployed serving our country. So I started rewriting history. I told Ian that Helena had been pushing this narrative about military husbands from the beginning, that I'd tried to defend him, but she wouldn't listen. I made myself the victim of Helena's agenda instead of acknowledging I'd been a willing participant. This went on for weeks. Ian would try to get the full story. I'd give him bits that made me look better. He'd catch inconsistencies. I'd get defensive and turn it around on him. We were stuck in this cycle where he couldn't trust what I was telling him. Meanwhile, Ian was dealing with his own trauma. He'd talk about how helpless he'd felt, how he'd imagined this moment for months while deployed. And I'd stolen that from him. But instead of feeling guilty, I started feeling resentful that Ian was making this about him. Here, I was recovering from childbirth, trying to figure out motherhood, and he was obsessing over something in the past. I felt like he should just let it go. I started telling friends and family a version that made Helena the villain and us the victims. People were appropriately outraged, which felt validating. But Ian wanted justice. He wanted Helena to face consequences. He started talking about filing complaints, pursuing legal action. That made me nervous, because a real investigation might reveal the truth about my conversations with Helena. So I tried to talk Ian out of pursuing complaints. I'd say things like, "It's in the past, let's focus on our baby," or "I don't want to relive this." I made it sound like I was being mature, when really I was covering my tracks. When Ian filed the formal complaint, I had to pretend to be supportive while secretly panicking about what might come out. If Helena told her side, if she repeated what I'd said about Ian, my marriage would be over. Helena got fired quickly once the hospital reviewed what happened. They couldn't justify her decision to ban Ian without documented evidence of abuse. But Helena didn't go quietly. She fought the firing, claimed she'd been acting in my best interest based on concerning information I'd shared during prenatal care. That's when I knew I had to protect myself. I started sabotaging Ian's legal efforts without making it obvious. I'd find reasons why a lawsuit was a bad idea: expensive, time-consuming, traumatic. I made it seem like I was protecting our well-being when really I was protecting my secrets. But Ian was getting suspicious about my reluctance. When I'd argue against pursuing justice, he'd ask why I wasn't as angry as he was, why I seemed more interested in protecting Helena. I realized my marriage was probably doomed either way. If Ian found out the truth, he'd never trust me again. If I kept lying, he'd figure out I was hiding something. So I went on the offensive. I turned the situation around on Ian. I accused him of being obsessed with revenge instead of focusing on our family. I said his need to punish Helena was more important than my emotional well-being. I weaponized my postpartum emotions to make him feel guilty. It worked for a while. Ian backed off the legal action because he didn't want to hurt me further. But the damage was done. The trust between us was broken. The final blow came 8 months later, when Ian ran into one of Helena's former colleagues. This woman mentioned that Helena had been telling people she'd been fired for protecting a woman from domestic violence, and that she had documentation proving the husband was abusive. When Ian came home and told me about this, I knew the game was up. He looked at me with complete disappointment. He knew I'd been lying about something fundamental. I finally admitted I'd complained about him to Helena, but I minimized it. I said I'd been emotional and hormonal, that Helena had misinterpreted normal relationship frustrations. I left out how I'd fed into her narrative, how I'd essentially given her permission to see him as a threat. Even with my sanitized version, Ian was devastated. He couldn't believe I'd spent months complaining about him while he was deployed. He felt betrayed in a way that went beyond just the birth situation. We tried counseling, but it was hopeless. I couldn't admit the full extent of what I'd done, and Ian couldn't move past the betrayal. The counselor kept pushing for complete honesty, which just made me more defensive. Ian filed for divorce about a year after our daughter was born. He said he couldn't stay married to someone he couldn't trust. The divorce was brutal. Ian's lawyer used the Helena situation as evidence of my dishonesty and manipulation. I lost primary custody. The court felt my pattern of dishonesty made me unreliable. Ian got full custody with supervised visitation for me. But I refused to do the therapy work because I still didn't think I was the real villain. Helena had landed on her feet. She'd found work at a birthing center in another state and was being hailed as a champion for women's rights. She was giving talks about recognizing domestic violence and empowering women. She'd turned what happened with us into a success story. Ian remarried 2 years later to Sarah, a nurse at the base hospital. She was everything I wasn't. Straightforward, honest, supportive. They had a baby together, and from what I could see on social media, they seemed genuinely happy. Meanwhile, I was living in a small apartment, working a job I hated, seeing my daughter every other weekend under supervision. I'd lost my marriage, my family, my home, my reputation. Everyone knew the story of how I'd sabotaged my husband's chance to see his daughter being born. But here's the thing, I still don't think I was the real villain. Yes, I made mistakes, but Helena was the one who weaponized my private venting. She was the one who made the decision to ban Ian. She destroyed our family. Everyone acts like I'm some monster for being human, for having relationship problems, for feeling abandoned during pregnancy. They act like I should have been perfect every single minute, even when dealing with hormones and loneliness and fear. The worst part is watching Ian play happy family with Sarah while I'm struggling to rebuild from nothing. He gets to be the hero, the wronged military husband victimized by his manipulative wife. Sarah gets to be the saint who saved him. And I get to be the cautionary tale. The supervised visitation is humiliating. Having some court-appointed supervisor watch every interaction with my own daughter, taking notes about whether I'm being appropriate. Acting like I'm dangerous to the child I carried for 9 months and gave birth to alone. My family doesn't understand why I can't just move on and take responsibility. They don't understand that this isn't just about making mistakes. This is about having your entire character assassinated based on normal relationship problems that got twisted into something darker. The therapy the court ordered is a joke. The therapist keeps trying to get me to admit I weaponized Helena's concerns and manipulated the situation. She acts like I had some master plan instead of just being a pregnant woman who needed someone to listen. I've tried explaining that Helena was the professional who should have known better. That Ian wasn't innocent either. He was controlling and demanding and dismissive. But everyone just sees what they want to see. Helena gets to be celebrated as a hero, while I'm treated like a villain. She destroyed my family and got praised for it. She's probably making more money now than ever. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd kept my mouth shut during those appointments. But then I remember how lonely I was, how much I needed someone to validate my feelings. Helena gave me what I needed, someone who listened and understood. It's not my fault she took things too far. Everyone failed in this situation. Helena failed by overstepping boundaries. Ian failed by being so controlling and absent that I felt the need to vent to a stranger. The hospital failed by taking Helena's word without investigating, but somehow I'm the only one who paid the real price. Now I'm 31, living alone, seeing my daughter every other weekend, watching my ex-husband build a beautiful life with someone else, and everyone acts like I deserved it. But I know the truth. I was a victim too, of Helena's manipulation, of the system's bias against imperfect women, of a society that expects mothers to be saints while fathers get credit just for showing up. I lost everything because I trusted the wrong person. I'm tired of pretending to be sorry for things that weren't entirely my fault. I'm tired of taking responsibility for other people's choices. I'm tired of being the scapegoat for a situation way more complicated than anyone wants to admit. Helena destroyed my family and got away with it. Ian moved on and found happiness while I'm still dealing with the fallout. And everyone expects me to just accept it and be grateful for whatever scraps of motherhood I'm allowed. Maybe someday my daughter will understand what really happened. Maybe someday she'll see that her mother wasn't the monster everyone made her out to be. Maybe someday the truth will matter more than the narrative everyone wants to believe. But until then, I'm going to keep living and refusing to apologize for being human in an impossible situation. Because I know what really happened. And I know I wasn't the only one who made mistakes that cost us everything.